right. Okay, so it's 9 o'clock pods. This is our third training for this audience. So most of you work for emergency management or in fire departments. And if this is the first time that you're joining us, we do have our previous two web discussions recorded and posted on our website. So maybe somebody can link where those are into our chat box, one of our TAPI staff. And we've talked about all these topics that are already on this slide here for those of you who are doing mass immunizations for flu this year and getting ready to think about what to do for COVID. We are going to have about a little bit of time in the beginning. We know a lot of you are knee deep in flu clinics right now and starting to get a ton of questions about COVID vaccine and what your workflow is going to be. So we have reserved some time for you to ask those kind of burning questions. If you know what those questions are now, you can feel free to chat them in. We're going to get there in just a minute. But the majority of today, we're going to talk about vaccine safety. At the last training, this was overwhelmingly what you wanted to talk about. So you're starting to get a lot of questions about the process made for the COVID used to make the COVID vaccine. And we want to just give you all that foundational knowledge. So that's what we're going to spend most of our time talking about today. And this training is put on by your state vaccine coalition, the Arizona Partnership for Immunizations. And TAPI's mission is to foster community wellness and advocate for good public policy and best immunization practices. We have so enjoyed getting to know a lot of you over the last few weeks. You are our partners in prevention, and we just know what a key partner you are in protecting our communities against all sorts of vaccine preventable diseases. So thanks for letting us be part of your world. We are really happy to support you in whatever way we can. So, and my name's Rebecca Nevedale. I'm your MC, and I'm here with TAPI. And Macrina, do you want to say hi? You have to unmute yourself so they can hear your voice.
Okay, there we go. I'm Macrina Leach with Maricopa.
So Macrina is the nurse program manager. So she runs all the immunization programs. And then we have a special guest today, Will Humble. Will is the executive director for the Arizona Public Health Association. And they have about 800 members throughout the state and are the public health workforce that are really on the ground alongside you fighting this COVID-19 pandemic. They are doing contact tracing, monitoring data, analyzing policy, providing healthcare services and social supports in these really challenging times. And just because of his role, he's been really following a lot about the vaccine process. So Will, do you want to say hi too?
Good morning, Rebecca, Macrina. Thanks for the invitation, everybody. Pleasure to be here, and happy Tuesday. Oh, and the ACA case is being heard today, by the way, as we speak.
Oh, is it?
Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court. We're going to have by the way, we're going to have a webinar this Friday, first thing in the morning at 9 o'clock. And Dr. James Hodge, some of you may know, he's going to be summarizing the arguments that are made today at the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's a webinar that we have for our members on Friday morning.
Cool, thanks, Will. And you know Macrina and I, so feel free to butt in if you have any. We're sure you will if you have questions or comments about anything that we're talking about. And Will's gonna, when we get to the part, we're gonna talk to you today about the process of developing a vaccine, the typical process. And Will's gonna talk to us about how that's been different for COVID. So, all right, so let's start. We're gonna start with just questions about the previous topics that we've had. You see my coworker getting a snack, I think, in the background. So we're going to talk a little bit about those things. So if you have questions about selecting a site, staffing your mass immunization clinic, storage and handling, procedures, screening, vaccine administration, go ahead and chat those in or unmute yourselves. And we had one that was emailed, Macrina, that I was hoping you could address. So we aren't doing flu shots this year. When do we need to identify community partners to host our clinics for COVID-19? It's hard to talk to them now when we don't have an event plan since there isn't a vaccine.
Well, to be honest with you, I totally feel for you. It is hard to plan and schedule and do everything when you don't have a vaccine. You don't know when it's coming or how much it's coming. But from what we're learning now, it's never too soon to get your partners in place. You can get your partners, you can identify your site, You could start getting volunteers to help. So I think you can start having those discussions now and just letting everyone know that it could change, but you want to, find your spots now. Volunteers, marketing, traffic control, parking, answering questions. So it's never too early, really.
Yeah, you can really start doing your kind of site visits. So looking around at where you might be who you might partner with to host a clinic, and think about where's the entrance, where's the exit, where would we station bodies, how would we keep people 6 feet apart? I mean, you can start doing all of those things now. And we had another question come in about volunteers, about the role of Medical Reserve Corps. What is that?
Well, so the Medical Reserve Corps here in Maricopa County, and I believe Pima County has a Medical Reserve Corps as well. These are a group of volunteers, medical volunteers, nurses, doctors, pharmacists, who can actually volunteer under the umbrella of the MRC. Liability is covered, their credentials have been checked, they're on a roster, and so they're just ready to go. You just call your MRC contact, and these volunteers are ready to go. And we've used them a lot during seasonal flu, and they're very valuable partners.
All right, and Manuel's chatting in that Pima does have an MCRSA too, so.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, and remember with volunteers, what we heard from Chief McCluskey last time talked with us about the drive-through clinics that they're doing for flu shots up in Heber Overgaard, and they partnered with the federally qualified health center in their community to provide immunizers. So they're nurses and nursing students from NAU. They also partnered with their hospital system to provide the vaccine and really be responsible for all the storage and handling of that vaccine. And then they also partnered with the Lions Club to do the registration and check-in. And I think that when you're thinking of who you're partnering with, you also want to think about who's going to market your event. And that's a huge role for volunteers. So that Lions Club, I'm sure, was telling all of their friends and on their email lists or social media, if they have it, that they were doing this event. So yeah, we know that the COVID vaccine is probably a little far away for most of you to get your hands on it, but start forming those relationships. And we have a poll here that we wanted to launch just to give people ideas. If you haven't, for those of you who have already planned or are, down a little ways, the process of planning your next mass immunization clinic, who are you partnering with? And you can select as many as you want here. This will just help, where are you likely to host it? This is going to help whoever asked that question to know who they should go after. All right, and I'll give you just like 4 more seconds here. Major hospitals, says Manny. Yeah, I think that the hospitals, especially for COVID, city facilities, says Jennifer Schroeder. Here, we'll share these results. So a lot of people are already talking with schools. And if you remember back to that first training that we did, schools are a really great partner site because there's lots of rooms, they're trusted, everybody knows where their community school is, they have internet access, which you really need, want to try and have lots of electricity outlets, so that's a great partner. But really anywhere that is going to be able to provide you the space that's big enough and help you with getting the word out to their constituencies, their people, it's going to be great. So one person's doing a grocery store, which is great. Macrina's done grocery stores before, but one time they set her up in the liquor area. So make sure you know where you're going to be if you're partnering with the grocery store. So
Drive-throughs and grocery stores are always really great sites.
Yeah, and I just chatting in UMOM, Phoenix Dream Center, and they have a mobile medical clinic unit for homeless community. That's great. All right, anybody else have questions about anything that we've covered before? We also had one about my child fainted at the last time they get a shot. Should they not get shots anymore?
Oh, no. Routinely fainting with vaccines is more of an emotional response to the process, much more than it is any sort of reaction to the vaccine itself. Routinely, we see fainting in our adolescents and our teenagers just because they get nervous, scared. So there's no reason not to get immunized again, as long as it was just fainting, any respiratory arrest or anything.
So get her flu shot.
Yep.
Yeah. So this question has come up a couple times on our evaluations too. So you've talked a lot about what to do. What do we not do at our flu clinics?
Well, I think the two most important things is, number one, never underestimate the value of having all those folks that support your vaccinators. I always say you need at least 2 to 3, maybe sometimes even 5 non-medical folks to crowd control, registering, monitoring the parking lot, monitoring the lobby where people are waiting after. So never underestimate that. And number two, never ever think that everyone knows what they're going to do, that everyone knows how to give a shot, or that everyone knows what crowd control means. So the best thing to do is to have just a few seconds of just-in-time training on how to give an IM or how to give a sub-Q, just-in-time training on this is what crowd control means, this is what registration means, so that everyone knows what their job is. And always have a single point of contact, a single person who can see the big picture. Make sure you have somebody who's managing the big process, so that they can see where there's any backups, any slowdowns, anything happening. Always have one person identified to be in charge.
Yeah, and one of the tips that we heard from one of the fire departments at these trainings was everyone should have the cell phone number of that main contact.
Right.
So if something happens, they can go right to the top as quick as of that event as quickly as they need to. And if you need help, if you know that you're planning your first flu clinic and you're not quite sure if when the last time your medics have had training on immunization administration or something, let us know. We can certainly help. Macrina or me, or pull in someone from your county and ask if they'd be able to. Everyone's here to help you make sure we get as many flu shots in arms, and over the next few years, COVID shots in arms too. So let us know how we can help with your training. So any other questions about your workflows or anything we've already covered? I'm not seeing any in the chat. You can unmute yourselves too. Oh, and Rhonda's saying in Navajo County, they do just-in-time training. Designate a pod manager and an after-action discussion. What can we do better or change? That's great. Yeah, we'd love to see make sure over time kind of share what are the things that we need to sustain, what are the things we decided we need to improve, to just be able to help you all learn from each other. So. And then we have this poll for those of you who've done clinics. We thought that this might help. Oh, stop that. There we go. So this is a little bit longer, but for those of you who've done clinics, what happened that you want to warn others about and make sure that they don't do? When you did a mass clinic, were you understaffed? Were you overstaffed? Did you order too many vaccines? Just what's some mistakes you want to warn others about? And there's a lot of options, so you may need to scroll. All right, we'll give you just a couple more seconds. I know this one's longer to read. Okay, but we hit about a third of the folks logged on, and we know that about a third of you have actually done clinics before. So understaffed people have, so make sure you're really thinking, and we've been asked so many times on this, well, what's the algorithm for staffing? And I think that that's hard. We've discussed that's hard to say. So you really got to get your feet a little bit wet before you can do them. One person overstaffed, that's not as bad of a mistake. And for those of you who've not ordered enough vaccine, it's hard. You want to be able to anticipate your demand and spend some time thinking about that. But at the end of the day, if you don't have enough flu shots, at least you've protected those people for flu. And Macrina, you've done that before, ran out of vaccine at plenty of events, and you do this constantly.
Right. And that we run out of vaccine, understaffed and overstaffed. We just did programs 2 Fridays in a row. One was overstaffed and one was understaffed. I mean, there's no perfect algorithm or science, and I've been doing this a really long time and we still didn't get it right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you just do the best you can.
But it's interesting to see that a lot of people, about 15% of folks selected poor choice of space. So that gets back to that original question, whoever emailed in saying,
Right.
Yeah, start talking about space now and do not do your trainings at a place or your mass immunization clinics at a place where no one knows where it is. So, and the same percentage say they didn't measure the right things to know how to improve. And we would love to help you with that. If we can jump on a phone call before your next event, or even come masked to your next event and help you think about how can you measure how many cars can you do an hour at a drive-through clinic, or how can you determine your algorithm for how many staff per shots. We'd love to help you think through that. We'd be learning together, but I think that it would really help over the years as we do more flu clinics. So, okay, so we are going to move into the bulk of our event. If you have other questions, chat them in and we'll get them to you, or call us afterwards and we can talk you through whatever questions that you have. So one of the things that we've learned getting ready for this over the last couple of weeks and talking to some of you is that when you say you want to talk about how to prepare for tough conversations, you're really thinking about, how can I tell my staff, the folks I'm going to be asking to immunize others, how can I empower them to be confident? Your target audience is your staff and the people who you're asking to host these events with you. They are going to then talk to other colleagues or coworkers, people that work in your agency that they're immunizing in closed pods, and then eventually patients and community members, or if you're doing flu clinics, answering those common questions from patients. But we're really focused on how do we help you talk to your people. So we're giving you a little bit more kind of foundational knowledge and reminders of those general principles of immunity so that you can do that. So we have another poll here. This is a little poll heavy in the beginning today. This is our second to the last one though. We really hope that you give us your honest answers for this one. This is so that we can help shape all of our educational efforts of healthcare workers and public health workers. So which statements do you agree with regarding COVID-19 vaccine? Select the ones you agree with. Okay, we'll give you another couple seconds here because they're still coming in. All right. So it looks like most of you are if the CDC recommends it, you're good. Some of you are waiting for, or not sure. Many of you are not sure, which I can totally relate to. Quite a few of you say, if my doc says it's good, then I'm good with it. And there's some of you who don't think you'll ever feel comfortable, which is okay too. So, you know, we understand that too. So, but thanks for sharing that. We'll see if today makes any difference on any of that. So, and then Christine Dixon's chatting, and my real answer is I need to see more data and safety info. Yep, totally get that. So we're going to review how the immune system works as just a reminder and a review for you. And then we're going to talk about the types of different vaccines, how they're made, and how they create an immune response. And we know a lot of that is review for you, but we think that you really can't talk about vaccine safety without talking about how the immune system works and how immune systems respond. And then we're going to also review the typical process of a vaccine, how you develop a vaccine, what happens with normally, and then how that has been accelerated for the COVID-19 vaccine without sacrificing any safety. So we have this like couple minute video, and we know it's geared towards the general population, but we just thought provided a quick overview of how the immune system works. Oh, sorry. Can you hear that? Yeah, okay.
Immunity is a natural defense system of the human body. Imagine millions of immune cells, like white blood cells, all on the lookout for specific germs. If they spot something dangerous, like flu, they prepare to fight. When that flu bug enters your body, the white blood cells move in on it. The immune cells arm themselves and then replicate, creating an army of clones. Then they launch powerful germ-killing agents called antibodies, and they tag the germs for disposal. Once the germ is removed, the immune army can disband. But they leave behind memory cells. Their job is to remember the invader and to sound the alarm if it ever appears again. The first time around, it can take at least a week to mount the defense. But next time, the system is prepared. The whole process takes barely a day. It's so fast, we may never have time to even feel sick. A vaccine pre-arms the immune system by sending in a weakened or dead version of the germ, just enough to be recognized. The immune cells mount the defense, and again, you may feel the effect. But because the threat is low, the immune cells quickly disband. However, the all-important memory cells have been created. The immune system's now prepared for the real germ, but without causing full-scale disease.
All right, so the immune system has three main functions. It detects a virus or a bacteria, you know, a bad guy, a germ. It destroys that virus or bacteria, and when it does that, it can take time. It can take a couple weeks or a couple days, and the body and the immune system wants to trap or expel that germ. So it wants to cough, sweat, sneeze, or swell it out. You know, those are all symptoms of your immune system doing its job, not the disease, right? Symptoms of the immune system doing its job. And then the immune system wants to remember how to fight that video. And vaccines trick the immune system into doing all of those things. So there are lots of types of vaccines. So Macrina, tell us, what are all the types?
Okay, so there are several types of vaccines. And as you can see, Let's go through them really quickly, one by one. First is the live attenuated vaccines, and those are your MMRs and chickenpox, probably the most common ones. They're attenuated, so it really is a weakened form of the wild virus that's out there. It must replicate to be effective. So you know how when you get a vaccine and within 7 to 10 days later, especially if it's an MMR, you might get a little rash, feel a little achy, or like my grandma used to say, you feel a little punk. That's the vaccine building an immune response. Immune response is similar to the natural infection, and these usually produce immunity with only one dose. And why we give 2 doses of, let's say, MMR or chickenpox vaccine is not because we're giving a booster dose. What we're doing is 95% of the folks will get immune response with the first dose of MMR. We give that second dose because 5% of the folks who didn't get it the first time are likely to get it the second time. So that's why we give 2 doses of a live vaccine. And then our next one is, the general rule. So like I said, the more similar a vaccine is to the disease it's causing, the better the immune response to the vaccine. And routinely, the more like the disease itself, the normal possible side effects may be. That's why within 7 to 10 days, you may see a slight rash and a fever with your MMR, but you don't have measles. It's just that vaccine working and building an immune response. And then we have inactivated, or as people like to call them, dead vaccines or killed vaccines. They can't replicate. Their immune response is a little different. It's unaffected by any antibodies in the blood. And these usually require more doses before you actually get an immune response built. Your antibody titer will diminish over time. And these are the ones where you usually get a sore arm. And that's about the worst normal side effect that you get. The general rule with this one is that if the time frame between the doses is increased, it doesn't change the outcome of how the vaccine is going to work. But if you make the intervals too close together, then sometimes that will decrease your response to the vaccine and not give you the same protection. So you really want to pay attention to those minimal intervals. And then there's the subunit recombinant polysaccharide and conjugate vaccines. And these use a small piece of the germ. A really strong immune response. This is going to be things like your pneumococcal vaccine, meningococcal, your shingles. It can be almost used on everyone. There's very few contraindications except for a severe allergic reaction to a component of the vaccine. And these are the vaccines that sometimes you are going to need a booster for to boost your immune response.
So because the live virus vaccines, they can't be given to immunocompromised people, right?
Correct. You're not going to give a live virus vaccine to anybody who has a compromised immune system because that vaccine could actually cause trouble. You're also not going to give that vaccine to someone who might have received blood in, let's say, the last 30 to 90 days, because you could have circulating antibodies. And you don't want to give that vaccine if you might have antibodies to measles on board.
Yeah, so we like when vaccines can be given to everybody. But then the con of that, like you said, is that those live virus vaccines are closer, so they're more effective. So you need for these kinds. So
and why these are why these vaccines need booster doses. This is why you always need to get your Tdap every 8 to 10 years, is because you are going to decrease that immune response. It's going to decrease a bit, and that booster, what it's going to do is when you get that vaccine, your immune system's going to recognize it and say, yep, I need to fire back up again. So that's why you need boosters.
So the way some vaccines are made, we need to have 2 doses in order to get the right immune response and it be effective over time. And for some vaccines, it's not that you need 2 doses, you need 1 dose, but then you need a booster in 10 years or however many years.
Correct. And keep in mind that a lot of this is actually discovered once vaccines are actually licensed. I've been in immunizations for a long time. And when I first started, we only gave 1 MMR vaccine. It wasn't until later in my career we discovered that 2 was actually better. So always keep in mind that We learn more as time goes on. Oh, and then we have the toxoid vaccines, which are diphtheria and tetanus. These are part of a germ that causes the disease rather than the germ itself. Boosters are often needed in this as well, and you just use a toxin made by the germ that causes the disease.
And these are the ones that they've been researching for a while.
Yeah, these, the DNA and the recombinant vector, they have been working on this technology for years. We've been reading about it. They've just never really had the opportunity to put science and technology into active work building a vaccine. Have been used. In fact, there are some veterinary vaccines that are currently using this technique. And there, again, there's been years and years of research on this technique, on these techniques.
Why do they need to know this?
Well, because there's a lot of different ways to create immunity. There's a lot of different ways to make a vaccine, and no one way is better, cleaner, safer, or better. They all are effective. They've all been researched. They've all been cleared and looked at by the FDA, the CDC, National Institutes of Health. So again, there's no one that's better than the other. They have the techniques that they're using now have been researched, and they've been practicing, and they've been working with these techniques for years, and have just been waiting for the opportunity to use these new techniques. Those of us who work in vaccines are so totally excited about the fact that they're actually using these techniques to build vaccines. And creating new vaccines is not new. I spoke to a really nice lady the other day who was in her 80s, and informed me that she would never have taken a vaccine if she had never taken a new vaccine. She informed me that to her, polio was new, measles vaccine was new, every vaccine she's ever taken has been new.
And every one of those strategies is being used to create the COVID-19 vaccine. There are over 200 vaccines in trials right now, or it's somewhere in the research phase. So, and we wanted to just make sure that you recognize that, you know, you've gotten vaccines already, or your kids have gotten vaccines already using all of these technologies, and, you know, without any harm. So this is a simple, does anybody have any questions about how vaccines work or the types or any of that? I know we flew through it, but we know it's review for most of you. We did get one comment on, remember, pregnant women aren't given live doses either, which, yes.
Oh, correct.
Good reminder. Okay, so this is just a really simple process map on what the typical process is to develop a vaccine. So we're going to review the typical process, and then Will is going to talk with us about how that process has been adapted for the COVID-19 vaccine. So the first thing we do is identify a disease, right? What is it that we want to prevent? Scientists enter a preclinical phase, and during this phase is when they look at that germ, you know, the bacteria or the virus, and they figure out what about that virus is making us sick. And then they can isolate that part of the virus that makes us sick and study that and decide which of those different types of vaccines do they want to develop, and what do they theorize the immune response would be based on the strategy that they use. Then they enter into animal model studies. The purpose of animal model studies is really to prove your concept. Does what we think worked about isolating this part and creating a vaccine in the way that we did, is that the kind of response that we got on these animals? And they're also looking in these animal model studies about safety already. So if something really bad happens to an animal, they don't want to go any further with it. The thing that scientists can do things to really look at immune response in animals and dissect their immune system in ways that they can't do with humans for ethical reasons. So that's a really important phase. So after they get their results from those studies, this is when they would typically publish those findings. They would start going to millions of conferences and presenting those findings and shopping around for someone, a biomedical company, a pharmaceutical company, to buy the idea and allow them to go into phase 1 trials. So then we go into human trials, and we're going to pick apart the human trials a little bit in just a second. But the big thing with human trials is they are looking at, is it safe? Is it effective? And is it effective over time? Does it create that immune response and keep that immune response as the body's exposed to it over time? And they're looking at dosing. So how much of the vaccine do we need to put in the body to create that immune response that's going to have the least amount of side effects? So side effects, mainly meaning, fever, feeling punk for a few days, which happens with vaccines as your immune system responds. So after the human trials, then we go to that lower left box there for licensure and recommendation. So you're going to have the FDA, there are 90 review boards typically that look at all the science going on in those human trials to make that recommendation and say, yes, it's safe and it's effective in these doses. Then the FDA looks at all of that science and determines, is it safe enough for it to be sold on the market? That's their main function, is can we sell it? Then all of that data, once that's approved, goes to the CDCs and their advisory committee on immunization practices. It's called ACIP, and you'll be hearing that acronym a lot in the next couple of weeks. And what ACIP does is looks at all that scientific evidence again and determines who should get the vaccine. So what's the target population? When should they get it? What age should they get it at? How long ago, how far away from getting a blood transfusion or having another live virus vaccine? What's the interval? They're also going to talk about what dose or what frequency. So when should boosters come? And the ACIP also looks at clinical recommendations. So they're the ones that are going to publish contraindications and precautions. So that's kind of how those different agencies, what their roles are. So FDA is around licensing. Can it be sold? Is it safe and is it effective? CDC is and ACIP is who the providers are going to look to for those clinical kinds of things. And ACIP also, for typical, vaccines, they're going to look at burden of disease. And a lot of you we know have worked in military. So, you got shots for all sorts of things. So how come, I didn't have those shots when I was a kid or in the United States? And ACIP really looks at return on investment and addition and whether they recommend that for the general population. So if it's not a disease that's common in the US, they typically wouldn't recommend that vaccine be given to everyone in the United States. It just doesn't make financial sense. So for COVID, obviously everyone can get it. It's a lot more widespread than some of the diseases that we have vaccines for that we don't all routinely get. And ACIP will also look at implementation issues. So how is it packaged? And will the packaging, create any errors inadvertently and things. So after all that regulation stuff's done, then they mass manufacture vaccines. Manufacturing is very expensive. So a pharmaceutical company or biomedical company would not manufacture a vaccine before they already know it's going to be sold, and it's going to be sold to the masses in the United States. And then they launch and enter phase 4. And phase 4 trials is looking at immunocompromised people and more special populations. So to circle back to clinical trials, we've heard a lot about this on the news lately. So phase 1 clinical trials is really focused on safety and does the immune response, happen the way that the scientists theorized it would and proved it would in the animal study trials. So you're looking at 20 to 100 healthy people. It's a really small sample size. They start looking at doses, but really this is about safety and does the immune response happen the way we think it did? So traditionally, after phase 1 is done, it goes to those review boards. They say, yes, the thinking is sound. There wasn't some alarming kind of side effects that had happened or anything. Now let's get the money and the financial backing to move to phase 2 trials. In phase 2 trials, we're still looking at safety, but we're really looking closely at dosing. So how much vaccine do we need to give someone? If we give too much, then we might be more likely to get side effects like fevers or sore arms and things like that. If we give too little, we may not be able to produce the immune response that we want. But we are looking at several hundred people in those phase 2 trials. So when phase 2 ends, we say, okay, it's safe. Okay, here's what the dosing is that's going to create the immune response that we want. Now let's go find the money to do phase 3 trials. And phase 3 trials are thousands or tens of thousands of volunteers. You're talking a lot of people in these phase 3 trials. And what the scientists say is this is where the rubber meets the road. We do look at safety still, but we're mainly looking at efficacy in phase 3 trials. Does it work? And does it work for a period of time? Does it keep that immunity? Scientists use double-blinded randomized control trials during this phase, which means the researchers and the volunteers don't know whether they're receiving the vaccine or if they're receiving a placebo. And if they receive, but they, give people one or the other, and then they follow those people over time. So for diseases where we have treatments for the disease, you're able to do that kind of quickly, because if you give the placebo group, then you can expose people to that disease. If they were to get it, you'd be able to treat them with it and they'd be fine. But for something like COVID, where we don't have reliable treatment, we're having to rely on people getting exposed to that disease in the general community. So they are following these people really closely to see, has your spouse contracted COVID and tested positive, and did you get it, and those things. The other thing with the trial phase is the FDA receives constant progress reports. They do site visits while in the labs and during the testing phase. And another thing is that there's a higher safety standard for vaccines than compared to the same processes used to test drugs. And for drug trials, but for drugs, you're giving people who are already sick a potential treatment. So the health impact, the benefits of that health impact outweigh the risks. For vaccines, we're trying to prove that they don't harm healthy people that potentially have infections. So the standard is much higher. And this is how long those phases take. So traditionally, that first phase is going to take 6 months to 3 years. Human trials, phase 1, a year to 3 years. Then you go, get your money for phase 2. That's going to take another 6 months to 2 years. I mean, all of this depends on how easy is it to find volunteers? How easy is it to find volunteers with racially, different racial groups, different ages, different parts of the country? Phase 3 would take 6 months to 2 years. That licensure and recommendation can take 3 months to 18 months, which is a long time. And all of that has to happen before manufacturing and launch. Vaccines typically take like 15 to 20 years. So that was a lot, but what's different? There's a lot that's different now. Let's go to mainly, the market need is there and the political will is high. But I'm wondering if, Will, we can pull you in and maybe you can talk to us about what's different in those first 2 phases, like preclinical and animal model.
Yeah, so I'll talk about that, and then you're going to have another. So there's a few things that I want to cover there. So I'll just briefly touch on the preclinical part of it.
Okay.
And I just put something in the chat box which basically summarizes the differences, and the big difference is that it's money, to be honest. And so for a normal vaccine, the vaccine manufacturers, the companies, whether Moderna, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, whatever, they take the financial risk and they put the research and development money into the vaccine with the understanding that they're going to get a return on investment for that, for developing that vaccine. And so their decisions are by and large made using risk benefit money-wise. So the chief financial officers and money people are making a lot of the decisions about how to fund the preclinical trials and how much research to put into how much resources to put into that. That's different that's the biggest difference for these SARS-CoV-2 vaccines, is that the financial risk is being borne by governments. In Europe, it's the Western democracies that have been financing research and development and production of these vaccines. And same in the US, although I don't think Pfizer took R&D money, which is going to be probably our first vaccine, but they did take $2 billion to manufacture during phase 3. But in the preclinical phase, that really there's no difference in terms of the science of what happened. The difference is how fast it happened, and why it was so fast is because the taxpayers, you and I, and people who buy US Treasury bonds are paying for it. So that means they don't have to wring their hands if you're for the preclinical phase, like how much money you're going to put into it, because you know you're going to be made whole by the U.S. government and the French government, UK, Germans. So so that's really the biggest difference. Clinically and scientifically, it's not any different. How fast it is happening is the big difference, and that's because of money being infused into the system as a result of this being a public health emergency that has such profound impacts on the economy.
And we'd add too that the transparency of scientists being able to share information in real time made those early stages go down to just 4 to 8 months. I mean, they've been tweeting results to each other. All of that's been really transparent. But normally, the way a scientist, you'll have a company that has 2 or 3 scientists working on a vaccine, or maybe 25 scientists working on a vaccine. And during these early phases, they have to test each thing like hundreds of times because they're using that scientific method. Well, now they're able to say, here's the type of vaccine, here's how it was created, here's the animal test subjects we tried it on. Anybody else doing the same thing? And there's thousands of scientists now repeating all of those tests at the same time, sharing information in real time and their results, which has really, really also helped accelerate that.
Right. But there's an administrative component to that as well. So that's that data sharing. There's an acronym for it, EFPIA. It's this it's a volunteer. Yeah, it's a volunteer group that you agree to share your data, anonymized data, and that. But in order to get R&D money, you had to agree to participate in that. So in a sense, when you take the money, you're agreeing to submit your data using the data sharing
that system.
That system. So yeah, that's right.
So do you want to talk about the trials and what's made it what made the faster and stuff?
So 2 things have made development of this vaccine. 2 categories of things have made development of this vaccine so much faster. One is a science thing, and one is, of course, an administrative money thing. So I'll do the science thing first because they're both cool, but the mRNA thing is super interesting. So the first 2 there's 4 vaccines in US clinical trials. I think, Rebecca, you mentioned that there's like upwards of 100 clinical trials happening around the world. There's 4 that I know of happening in the US, Moderna, Pfizer, Inovio, and Janssen. The first 2, Moderna and Pfizer, use this brand new technology. Well, it's not a new technology, but it's new for vaccine development. And it's called messenger RNA. And I'm not like a full-on scientist. I'm not a lab guy. I'm more of a big picture person. But basically what this new way of making vaccines does is you're injecting a messenger RNA particles into participants, so into people, and then the messenger RNA triggers your body, your cells, to make the antigen. So you're not injecting the antigen like you are with other vaccines. Your antigen is being injected with a lot of these other vaccines by like on a vector virus, or like Macrina talked about, the inactivated virus, or the attenuated viruses. The antigens are attached to those the viruses that either attenuated or killed viruses that go into your body. This mRNA, what it does is the mRNA goes into your body, and your cells like grab the mRNA, which is like the template for how to make the proteins and stuff. And then they're like, oh, I see this mRNA. The cells are like, oh, let's make this because here's mRNA strand, and it gets into the cell, and your cell then makes the antigen. And then by making the antigen, the rest of the immune response happens where your body's like, oh, like in the movie you just saw, that clip. I like that. It's the memory cells that never get the respect they deserve, by the way. And that's what happens. It's these mRNA particles, which is it's RNA, and it gets into the cells. It makes the antigen. The antigens elicit the immune response. So that's how this one works. Now, the category you said is what's different and why is this going faster? mRNA is a faster, the preclinical phase is faster for that because like influenza, you need the chicken eggs and all that stuff, and it takes forever, not forever, but a long time to develop the vaccine. And for this, it doesn't take nearly as long because of the technical parts of how you develop the mRNA and how the whole thing works. So it's a lot faster just science-wise because of the way mRNA technology works. So that's Moderna and Pfizer. And so I don't think it's any coincidence that the first two vaccines that will be going in to the FDA after their phase 3 trial is done to get approval or emergency use authorization, and I don't think we'll have time to talk about the difference on those, is they're both mRNA vaccines. That's not, I don't think, a coincidence. It's because it's a faster way of doing stuff. Mm-hmm. So they're finishing phase 3 earlier. The next two are Inovio and Janssen. Inovio is a DNA plasmid, and then Janssen is a non-replicating viral vector. Those are where those antigens are. So that's like the science thing of what's faster. The administrative thing of what's faster is just money. It's just money. The federal government, US, and the Europeans also have, not only did they assist with research and development of these vaccines, they also bought vaccine and signed contracts with these manufacturers so they would make the vaccine during phase 3. That would never happen normally. You'd be nuts to make your vaccine before you know whether it's safe or effective if you're a vaccine manufacturer. But when the US government is paying you to deliver the vaccine, and if it doesn't work, you still get paid and it goes to the landfill, or if it's not safe, it will go to the landfill, but you still get paid. So those two things are why this is faster. The big reasons why. So that's that. Now, I just want to say, and you didn't ask me this question, but I'm going to answer it anyway, which is like, these mRNA vaccines are brand new. It's like, that's never happened before. And so new things scare human beings. Well, some human beings, some don't, some are risk tolerant, but a lot of humans get scared of new things. And this is a new technology. And so there's going to be people that are scared because it's new. Not me, because I trust the system, but there are people that will get scared. This is a new thing. So that's why, in my opinion, it's super important for these vaccines to go through the FDA approval process and not just go and the companies apply for emergency use authorization and deploy it to the public that way. Because remember, in fact, HHS this morning announced that they have already paid for, remember I said they paid for vaccine, and Pfizer's on track to have 50 million doses by New Year's Day. So if they submit their data and get emergency use authorization, we could be vaccinating people at the end of November probably, or early, at the end of November. But in my opinion, that would be a mistake because these mRNA vaccines are brand new and people are going to be frightened of that, some people, when we can't afford vaccine hesitancy on this, because we're going to need to, in Arizona, vaccinate about 5 million people probably out of our 7.2 million to get to herd immunity. So if it's, say, 80% effective. So, so that's the thing. I think it should go through full approval because it will build more confidence as opposed to doing emergency use authorization. And there are ways to administratively speed up the FDA approval process. You can see Rebecca's slide there that's up about FDA licensing and how it takes 3 to 18 months. It doesn't have to take 3 to 18 months. It can take, we could do it in like 3 weeks probably, but it's going to take those review committees clearing their calendars, you know, and not doing their other responsibilities in academia and places like that. So that I wanted to touch those things. And I don't know if I still have time to talk about the storage and handling the part of it.
Yeah, let me back up quick to this phase 2 or to the trials, because I think that you talked about the importance of funding, but just to kind of hit that home, because I think that that is where we've saved a lot of time in this process. And a big deal was once the science was ready for after phase 1, once the data was all there, then they were able to have funding to go right into phase 2. But the other thing is typically there's 90 review boards that these vaccines have to go through between each of those phases. And they've consolidated all of those review boards into one so that all of the scientists have access to all the data at the same time and are able to kind of compare and contrast, which, you know, make a better decision about safety and efficacy. So that is a huge deal. And we're shortening these trial phase from 1 to 7 years to 6 months to a year. And when we say harmonized trials, you know, different of the 200 vaccines or 100 vaccines that are in human trials right now, you know, some of them are very similar, looking at similar things at the same time and sharing information. So, and then the other thing we wanted to make sure you knew about trials is that when we talk about, you know, human test subjects, so how many volunteers did we get? That we've gotten more volunteers for these vaccines than we have for most of our other vaccines that have gone to market. So on this graph here, you're going to see the number of volunteers for each of those vaccines that you've probably gotten or given to your kids, and how many volunteers that they had for each of those vaccines. And for this Pfizer and Moderna ones, the 2 vaccines that we're thinking we're going to get most quickly that Will's been talking about, we've gotten 30,000 volunteers for each of those. So scientists have been following those people since the phase 1 human trials, and know what's been happening in terms of effects, at least from them. And I think that that's just important to just make sure that people know, even though the speed has been fast for the human trials, it has not sacrificed safety or science at all. They're still having to evaluate the same things. And then, yeah, for licensure was what you were just talking about. So just to summarize what Will said of how that licensure got saved, I think that one of the big things that you just started talking about was just the scheduling of those meetings and those groups, you know. So it goes to ACIP, or it goes first to FDA, and remember they're looking at, is it safe? So they have that data, they're already reviewing a lot of that data as it's going along because they're monitoring the trials, and all of the data is open and available and transparent in ways it's never been before, because you can't give competitors information from each other. So they've already been looking at that. But also the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, those are just volunteer appointed, but volunteer people from different sectors. And, you know, just getting on their schedule, they're going to be able to have emergency meetings. That's logistically not what's been able to happen before for vaccines. So, yeah, well, we think that that'll go faster. And we still have more time because I want to get more input, Will, about, and Macrina both, about kind of what to look forward to. But this is just another graphic that you're probably going to see. It just popped up for the first time that we've seen it on a CDC webinar yesterday, and it just goes through what the phases have. But hopefully we've been able to talk a little bit about you know, how the speed, because I think that Will's right. People, there's two things that are going to make people a little bit more hesitant. One is that it's a new technology. We're new to us technology. It's really not a new technology, but that might cause some people some confusion. And then another is that people are going to say this happened too fast. And Macrina will tell you, we've heard that for every vaccine that's been new, that hit the market.
Yeah, I still have people who refuse to take any vaccine with H1N1 in it, a flu vaccine, because it's too new. So that's going to be a complaint and a concern.
Right. And we need to address that, right? So we need to just give people the information that we have, and you're going to need to do that. And people will make up their own minds, and they should make up their own minds. So, but this is another slide that'll show the process. And Will talked a little bit about emergency use authorization and full authorization. He shared his opinions on that too, which for those of you who know Will, know he will always share his opinions. Tappy and I'm sure, not to speak for the county, but we're just kind of waiting right now for these recommendations to come down. And then, but I think overall are confident that the science has been sound. The process has been protected, even though it's been sped up. And whatever kind of authorization comes down the pipe, you know, we'll be able to talk with you about how to support people in implementing through that authorization. But Will, go ahead and talk about kind of what's next and other thoughts that you have, because we do have plenty of time.
Okay, good. So I'm going to do a thing called share screen, but it says that I'm disabled the participant.
Okay, go ahead. Nicolene, could you give him powers? Will needs more power since he's talk.
Okay, there. Okay, can you guys see it?
Yep, we see it.
So I only want to do 2 slides. This is one of them. This shows, these are the first 2 vaccines, probably. Pfizer almost certainly be the first vaccine. I just wanted to bring this up because y'all are going to be running clinics, and it's an important part of this is the cold chain requirements that these vaccines will have. And so the Pfizer one, which Pfizer says they'll have 50 million doses, which would be 1 million for Arizona doses, not courses of treatment, because these are all there's a booster with each of them. But that Pfizer is, so it's frozen liquid, 5 doses per vial, no preservative. So at a minimum of 975 doses, that's for ordering and all. Oops, messed up. And this is what I want to talk about: storage. Shipped directly from manufacturer, -70C, which is -94 F, for 6 months. And you can refrigerate it for 24 hours before you use it, so it can thaw. But at room temperature, it can only be out for 2 hours before you use it. So that's something to think about as you do the planning and stuff.
I believe, Will, they've changed that refrigerator temperature. I think it's now up to 5 days.
Okay, 5 days thawed out. Is it still 2 hours at room temperature?
2 hours at room temperature.
Okay, so anyway, so go with what Macrina said, because this is a slide from like a month ago. And then, but look at Moderna, also an mRNA vaccine, -20C, which is close to a regular freezer. If you turn a regular freezer down, you probably get the -4C on storage, and refrigerated for 7 days up to, which is what Macrina just said, I think, about Pfizer, and 6 hours after punctured. So these are 10 dose styles for vials for Moderna. So that's that. And on the top, I just want to show you those boxes. This is one of the, I'm sure Macrina and anyone who's working on this, it's a big deal. At least it seems like to me that there's a booster. So on Pfizer, it's 21 days after the first dose is your second dose, and Moderna is 28 days. So it's like with like a normal vaccine, like influenza, let's say, you know, get your vaccine, come back next October. Well, this is, you got to find them again and bring them back in 21 days. And I am a total guilty party. I'll give you my thing, which is I got my shingles shot, you know, And then I needed a booster, and they called me back, and I was busy, and I blew it off, and I still never got that booster. So there's going to be it's a hard thing to get people back, because there's going to be people, and I'm one of them, that thought, well, I had one, I'm probably okay, good enough, kind of thing. So that booster is going to be a thing that you guys need to think about and plan for, because everyone needs to come back in 21 days. It's just a thing to think about.
And if you get Moderna, you need to get Moderna. If you get Pfizer, you need to get Pfizer.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Is the same manufacturer and same vaccine, which is also an added challenge, because you most likely will have to go back to the exact same place to get it.
Do you think, Macrina, that so the folks who are mostly on our line are EMS and fire departments, we know that Pfizer will be the vaccine that comes out first. Mm-hmm. But do you think that they will be asked to provide Pfizer, or do you think that by the time, so Will said there's going to be, there's 87 million healthcare workers, food service handlers, teachers, people who we assume are going to be high up on that list nationally. So I think by the time most of these EMS providers are hosting clinics, if they're not with you and your medical director at the county health departments.
So the optimist in me is saying that by the time we get to sort of hitting the huge population, moving away from healthcare who works directly with patients and EMS, by the time we get to the general population and more like food folks who work in the food industry, and I think we're going to be talking hopefully about a vaccine that storage and handling is a little bit easier. Just think about storing something at -70. I mean, we're going to need Kevlar gloves just to get it out, which is something we don't normally do. So I think by the time we start having clinics open to more of the general public, the vaccine storage and handling is going to be easier.
And for now, what you all should be doing is go back to that CDC storage handling toolkit. The same principles are used for every vaccine. They're all at different temperatures. I wouldn't just overwhelm yourself with thinking, do I have a freezer for that? Because it may not be the vaccine that you are going to get. Macrina needs to really freak out about it. The county health departments really need to. But I think for those of you on the line, it's good for you to know, because you're going to be getting questions from your staff, because they know that you're going to be helping with this effort over time. But just familiarize yourself with the traditional tried and true storage and handling workflows, making sure that your staff is trained, they know how to check refrigerate, that you have processes in place that they check refrigerators, that they do temp log checks, that you have data loggers set up. Knowing all of those regular things that you need to know is what you really need to be focused on. So, but go ahead, Will, what do we have?
Okay, this is my last thing, but I just want to talk about it, is like how many shots are we going to need to give? And a lot to get the herd immunity. And a lot will depend on how effective the vaccines are. And so we don't know for sure, but the number I hear mentioned most often is that in order to get the herd immunity, we need to get about 65% of the population of people to have antibodies and an immune response to this SARS-CoV-2 virus. And let's imagine for a moment, this is probably a pretty close number, that about 15% of us by New Year's Day will have been infected and recovered from this virus. So we're going to get 15% of that 65% with natural infections. And then we have to get the rest of the herd immunity from vaccines, which is a function of the vaccine effectiveness and what percent of the population that you actually are able to administer the vaccine and the booster for. And so this curve just shows you how important effectiveness is, like in terms of just executing the vaccination program. Yesterday, Pfizer said that they believe that they're at the 90% level. That's really high. I mean, that's on the level almost of measles. So vaccine. So if you go to this chart and look at estimated vaccine effectiveness at 90%, in order to get the herd immunity that we need to move on from this pandemic, we'd have to vaccinate 55% of Arizonans. And so there's 7.2 million of us. So 7.2 times 0.55 is, someone is smarter than me to know what that is. Let's say it's 4 million or 4
Yeah.
million out of 7 million people to get vaccinated. But if the vaccine is 60% effective only, then we'd have to vaccinate like 6 million people. Big difference. Why? Why is that a big difference? Because there's probably 4 million easy people and 3 million, or probably 2 million harder people to convince, and 1 million obstinate people. So the deeper you go, the harder it is to convince people. And if we could get a 90% effective vaccine, then I think it's a lot better chances that we could get voluntary cooperation of 4 million people to get vaccinated, as opposed to voluntarily getting 6, because those 2 million people are going to be tough. The higher you go, the more tough nuts there are to crack, you know? So
Right.
that's all I wanted to show.
All right, thanks. And one of the things that we were mentioning on the line before some of you may have logged on is that we're all really excited about the announcement, the press release yesterday that Pfizer released. And just a reminder that that's a press release from the company. It's not from the FDA and the review of their science yet. So we at TAPI are really waiting for the FDA and the CDC to drive our interventions, but nonetheless, you know, super exciting. So I think, so when we know that a lot of you are gonna, I wanna move on because there's some questions about just general messaging, and we wanna make sure that we have a little bit of time to talk about that. But when we're thinking about why has this vaccine come so fast, right? We know you're gonna hear that from your folks in your office and your agency that you're asking to immunize. What we want to make sure that you know you are prepared to talk about is that the safety has been critical throughout this. Safety has not been sacrificed. Science hasn't been sacrificed. We've really used the same tried and true technologies in how to create vaccines, in how immune responses are created, and how to look at whether something's effective or not. There has been unprecedented collaboration and partnership where scientists are able to share information in real time from competing companies with competing companies. That has literally never happened before because the stakes have never been so high for the world in these modern times, right? There's been a lot of increased staffing. We can't underestimate the power of the availability of money has had to make sure that this gets drived. And our big time savers have been manufacturing alongside the trials. So doing that at the same time, having trials done at the same time, and scientists be able to look at those results together, and also just being able to reduce bureaucracies here in the US. You know, I don't know about other countries and their processes, but. And then another thing we wanted to let you know is, you know, vaccines are continually monitored in lots of different ways. So we talked last training when we talked about vaccine administration about VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. That's really an early warning system for the FDA and the CDC, because anyone can make a report to VAERS if they think their arm was a little too sore, or they had a fever that lasted for 2 days instead of 1 day, or they had some sort of a side effect that was, you know, bad enough that they felt like they should call their doctor, or they didn't call their doctor, but they still think somebody should know about it. Anything can go into VAERS. It's a self-report system. The Vaccine Safety Data Link, the VSD, is CDC and different healthcare organizations. What they look at is medical records. So they're able to do studies on kind of larger populations and look at side effects and reactions that way. PRISM is the post-licensure rapid immunization safety monitoring system. So that is part of FDA's system that they have to monitor any drugs that they license and be able to, they look at health insurance claims. So that is another way that you can kind of link any potential reactions to a vaccine. Then there's CISA, which is an initiative with medical research centers and the CDC. And that's when a doctor has like a really complex patient or something that that patient receives an immunization and they think something may have happened. They're able to jump in and look at that really quickly for that patient to see if it was linked to the vaccine. All of these safety monitoring systems are used for every single vaccine. Every batch for every vaccine, the FDA tests every batch of vaccine before it is shipped out for potency, purity, and whether or not it's sterile. This is what happens for all of our vaccines already. This isn't specific to COVID. FDA inspects all of our labs, and then obviously DOD and the VA, the National Institute of Health, the Office of Infectious Disease Policy, all of those people are constantly doing those things. A new system for the COVID vaccine is vSafe. This is an active surveillance system, which is going to be used for, so the first batch of people we know are going to receive this vaccine are going to be essential health workers, and which is, you know, hopefully a little bit more of a compliant population. They are going to be entered into this program where they're going to receive text messages and emails from the CDC asking them to report on a bunch of things. Have you had a fever? Did you have a cough? Anything else happen? They're going to get text messages daily for the first week post-vaccination. They're going to get weekly text messages or emails for 6 weeks, and then quarterly after that post-vaccination. So anytime there's a new vaccine, they follow the first few million people pretty closely outside the clinical trials that get it. But this is a little bit different in that it's partnered with VAERS, and then they're also ramping up VAERS to partner with the National Healthcare Safety Network, which is the nation's system to look at hospital-acquired infection and also includes long-term care facilities. So all that to say, there's additional safety that's going to be looking at. So I see a bunch of questions around like marketing and how do I talk to people? And I want to make sure that we can get to some of those. So what are the most effective, Brian was asking what are effective messaging strategies. So I think that we don't have a message for COVID vaccine. We, as you can tell, we're kind of waiting to see which vaccines are going to be released, who is going to be the population that's going to be able to receive them. And then based on our target population, what is it that we want those people to know and what would the messages be for COVID? I think until then, we're trying to think about ways to communicate to our partners, how do we help them feel better to think that the science was protected and the safety is there. I think for flu shots, if you're working on flu clinics and things like that, Macrina, I wonder if this is someone who's doing a mass immunization clinic for flu, like right now, what would you say? Effective messaging strategies, and how do you recruit people?
Well, so I think the number one is you usually get the tried and true reasons for not getting vaccinated, right? I've never gotten the flu, so who needs a flu vaccine? And those messages. I think the idea is that flu vaccine is safe, it's effective, it protects you from, and the reason you get immunized with the flu vaccine is not necessarily to stop you from getting the flu, but it's to stop you from getting hospitalized and from dying. And I think that that is really the message we need to drive home, is that you still may get a mild case of the flu. Keeps you home for a couple of days maybe. But the reason we give you flu vaccine is to protect those around you, your grandmother, your great-grandmother, your parents, the young infants around you. And you also get the flu vaccine to hopefully decrease your risk of death and hospitalization.
Yeah, and really it's, if you have immunizers, medics or whoever that are already talking with patients and families, we call them real people, not people in healthcare, and they're struggling with, how do I answer these questions? Please let us know if we can jump on the phone or do anything to, create a session just for them or come down and talk to them. we'd love to do that. Really, you need to know what exactly is the person asking. So it's hard to say, here's the message. I think the community message is flu shot is safe. Flu shot is going to protect you. Go get the flu shot. And when you're thinking about getting that message out, using those partnerships, you know, to echo your voices. Some people are going to listen to a medic. Some people are going to listen to their pastor and things like that. And there's another question specific about flu. Is there historical data about percentage of people getting flu vaccine? I think we usually end up, so adult data is really hard to get our hands on because for a lot of reasons, we won't go into that. But what is a normal year? About 60% of our population or 40%?
Probably somewhere in the middle, probably more about 40 to 50%. And again, the ones really, the folks who are carrying the heavy load on getting immunized are our kiddos and are over 65. So the folks that are probably more adverse to getting a flu vaccine are 19 to 45, 50. It's our young kids and our seniors who are doing the heavy lifting on getting those numbers up. But keep in mind that that age group that I just mentioned that doesn't get immunized are hanging out with the older population and those younger populations. So not only do you need to protect yourself, but you need to protect those around you.
Yeah, and we'd really be interested if anyone is measuring, you know, has an aim for your events that you really try to achieve. We would really love to see what they are. That's something that at TAPI we've kind of wrestled around with too. What is the right goal for our community for flu immunizations? And I like Brian's comments in the chat about, you know, maybe we can use that knowledge about how well we do with flu to help us get you know, a realistic goal, an aim as a community for COVID vaccine. That's a really great idea. I think when we're thinking about how you're talking with your staff and then how they talk with patients and community members, there's kind of three things we want to make sure you remember. The first is please be confident in your recommendations. The science is on your side with vaccines. And if you are indifferent, the people around you, you know, you transfer that indifference. And it is so critical that we immunize a good chunk of our populations for all of these diseases that we protect against to achieve herd immunity. This is how we get rid of diseases, is through vaccines. And the second is to use your resources. And we have talked a lot about resources for workflows for your mass immunization clinics and checklists and you know, what to measure and how drive-through resources. We haven't talked a lot about resources for talking to people. Jennifer's chatted in a few things in our chat log here. We also want to make sure, you know, CDC has great resources. Our website at tapi.org has great resources. We're your state coalition. If you're working if you see a flyer that we have or something and you're like, this will not work in my state or in my community, you know, we would love to help you update that and however we can support you to get those messages out in your at the local level. The Children's Hospital of Philadelphia has a vaccine education center. It is my favorite vaccine resource.
They have the most incredible resources for you. We use them all the time.
Yeah, it's really good. And it's for all different types of people. I mean, you can, if you email us after this and say, okay, I want to talk a little bit more about my staff at our weekly, you know, meeting or something about this specific topic, chances are I would go on that website to figure out our talking points, because it's for professionals, it's for parents, it's for scientists. I mean, they have everything. Obviously, ADHS and your county health department are huge resources for you. Don't forget to talk to your medical director, because they they think a lot about these kinds of things and have a lot of expertise. And we find sometimes they're not as well utilized as they could be. And, you know, we're here to help, however. And then the other reminder that we have for you is to be honest. If you don't know the answer to a question, don't answer it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it might, if you are, you know, when we did that first poll about COVID, there were, you know, 44% of you said, yep, CDC says I'm pro-vaccine. Well, then I'm going to be pro-vaccine. So, and we are thrilled for that because we know you're not going to be indifferent. You're going to be confident about your recommendations. But some of the answers to commonly heard questions are ones that we hate giving. You know, can I get a side effect from getting this vaccine? Yes, you can. You know, do adverse reactions happen? Yes, they do. You know, 1 in a million people that will receive a vaccine will have an adverse reaction. It's not that we are hiding that information, and we don't want to hide any information. So make sure that you're always being honest. And this is just a graphic that our medical assistants and our nurses that we train love and always ask for. So that shows that your child is 1 in 2,662 kids will become a pilot. 1 in 10,000 gets struck by lightning. 1 in 380,000 would be on the Olympic team. 1 in 577,000 get elected to Congress. 1 in 750,000-ish become a billionaire, and 1 in a million have a adverse reaction to a vaccine. And we know that your child is 1 in a million, but you're better off putting your money on them becoming a billionaire. So, Macrina, we only have a couple minutes left. Well, before what are you going to say when people, because I'm sure your nurses that work with you are hesitant too and saying this vaccine's coming out too fast. What's your 10-second response to that, 30-second response to that?
Well, yes, this vaccine came out faster than others, but nothing has been skipped. None of the science has been skipped, none of the technology, none of the oversight has been skipped. And I'm going to use Will's statement. You know what? They just threw a lot of money at this to make it move faster. And usually that's what manufacturers have to wait for. They fund these themselves. But there is no way that science or technology was skipped. The other thing I always use is that these manufacturers of vaccine, they have skin in the game because they manufacture other vaccines. So this is their integrity and credibility, and their ability to continue to create vaccines in the future is based on how good they do this. So you've got to believe that vaccine manufacturers are out to protect children and protect communities. And I tell people, I worked in vaccines for over 30 years, and my job is, as a nurse, is to make people healthy and to keep them healthy. And so sometimes just saying that actually, helps you listen. That's my 10-second speech.
Well, and they didn't throw a lot. I like the throw a lot of money at, because they didn't throw a lot of money at the problem. They threw a lot of money at a solution. I mean, we know they threw a lot of money at private businesses that have the technologies and the scientists to do so. We would love to see, I'm going to do this, launch a repoll on this is the same question you were already asked about COVID. And which statements you agree with. We're just curious, this is our first time talking about the COVID vaccine. As you know, we've been kind of avoiding it and just talking about flu because we've been waiting on which of the flu vaccines or which of the COVID vaccines will hit the market. Help us improve, because we want to know how to talk about this to professionals. You will talk about it to regular people. We need to know, how do we talk about it to people who are going to immunize, and whether or not we're effective or not. And then I wonder if, while we're chatting it in, while folks are reading this, can the TAPI staff make sure, if we didn't already, make sure we chat in where to find the recordings of these webinars, all the checklists and tools for mass immunization clinics. Do not forget to sign up for the onboarding process. Use the onboarding tool. If you are going to be giving out COVID vaccine, you need to go through the ADHS onboarding process. We will chat that link in again already if we didn't already do that. Remember, TAPI is here to help you with billing. Is here to help you with billing. We email jennifer.t@tapi.org if you want help billing. Please fill out that evaluation, because we need to know, how well we do. And Stay tuned. You know, we were thinking we'll probably end up doing another training when the vaccine comes out, for you all and for this group. So we're thinking that's probably going to, you know, magically happen in another 3 weeks or so. If you think you need another training, or there's other topics that you really want us to dig in about, or, you know, have another one of the fire chiefs or EMS managers present what they've done with mass clinics, just chat it in or put it on that evaluation. So, and thank you all so much. You know, we might, we can kind of stay on. It's 10:30, so we're logging off, but we're getting a couple I'm getting a couple chats, Macrina, for you that we can probably throw in. How much longer does the county plan to provide free flu vaccines?
As long as we, so I guess is the simple answer. We still have quite a few doses. So if you have gotten flu vaccine from us in the past, go ahead, log back onto that site and request flu vaccine. I believe we have still tens of thousands of doses sitting in our walk-in refrigerator.
Okay. So as long as they have it, and flu vaccine doesn't expire until June, I'd assume that we're going to be giving this out for a while, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. Normally, we start to see people requesting flu vaccine kind of get a little bit lower around November, December, but then we pick back up again in January. But keep in mind that even though the recommendation is not to gather at Thanksgiving and probably Christmas, it's always a good time to get that vaccine in before those holidays.
Another question I'm getting is who's going to be getting the vaccine. So the way, and Will correct me if I'm wrong, but the way the CDC, the feds are going to make their suggestions on who you prioritize first. And then the states get to make their recommend, you know, take those recommendations and make decisions. We have a vaccine, we have an advisory committee called VPAC that is listed in the state COVID vaccination distribution plan. So they'll make those decisions, and then the counties can allocate, right? And so he's nodding and giving a thumbs up. So we're not quite sure, but we're pretty, you know, we know that the essential healthcare workers are going to be top of the list.
And
So
hopefully the staff and assisted living and skilled nursing are at the top of the list.
Yes.
Right.
And I would assume, given how they've changed the monitoring system to include that national healthcare network, the NHSN, the healthcare acquired infections tool that involves long-term care, I'll bet you that they are going to be on that top of that list. What will that mean for me in a rural community? We don't have a lot of healthcare workers. And I think that that's something that vaccine, that VPAC group, the state advisory committee will, if they're not already, I'm not on that group, I don't go to the meetings, but I'm sure if they're not already wrestling with that, they will be. Because yes, you don't have a lot of healthcare workers there. All right. Not seeing anything else in the chat. Okay, well, thank you all so much. Let us know how we can help. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Will.
Thanks, Will.